About a year ago, I reviewed Tori 3D and its sequel Tori 2, claiming that they're among the best indie platformers I've played thanks to their tight controls, fun, fast-paced level design, short but sweet length, and replayability. Since then, Siactro has taken this philosophy to the sandbox Collectathon genre with Super Kiwi 64. Technically, this isn't Marcus's first rodeo with the genre, as this game is actually a sequel to a game from several years ago called Kiwi 64. For this video though, I'm mostly just going to focus on Super Kiwi 64. While it didn't make as big of a splash as Tori did, this game did still garner an audience among indie platformer enthusiasts, and as a fan of the genre and the developer, I was really excited for this leading up to the release. That excitement shot up even more after the release of Beanie, a vertical platformer combining Donkey Kong Country with Doodle Jump. At the end of the game, you get to play a short demo of Super Kiwi 64, albeit much more simplified than what we would ultimately see in the final game. Despite that simplicity, I still really enjoyed this little demo and was even more excited to get my hands on the full game once it released. I wouldn't have to wait long though, as Super Kiwi 64 came out less than 2 months after Beanie, finally dropping on December 2nd, 2022. I bought it the minute it came out and proceeded to beat the game in less than an hour. Oh my. Looks like we're gonna need to take a closer look to see if Super Kiwi 64 was worth the hype despite its short length. Before I jump into it though, do please leave a like and a comment on the video, and subscribe if you're new. They really help me out a ton with growing this channel. Thanks! While I did say earlier that Super Kiwi 64 is a sequel to Kiwi 64, that only really applies in a mechanical sense. Narratively, it's actually a sequel to Beanie. In that game, Kiwi asks his friend Beanie to help gather some glue to build a raft so that he can travel to a floating island he saw off in the distance. Being the nice friend that she is, Beanie travels through 9 forests to reach the beehives at the top and collect the honey for Kiwi to use as glue for his raft. He then sets off for the mysterious floating island, but gets sucked into a tornado. Crash landing on the island, he meets this dog character who I'm not sure ever gets a name, and he offers to help Kiwi escape the island with the power of gems scattered throughout the level. I had to replay all of Beanie just to get this cutscene footage, by the way, but the game's only like 10 minutes long, so it wasn't a big deal. At the end of this short demo is a tease for the upcoming Super Kiwi 64, where our journey begins proper. Jumping into Super Kiwi 64, there's no intro cutscene this time. In fact, there isn't really any story at all. Considering Beanie had actual cutscenes and a narrative throughline, it's kinda strange that the game following up on that cliffhanger just kinda plops you into things with no explanation. The dog has a few random lines of text, but they're mostly just references to Kiwi 64 and Beanie that make no sense out of context if you haven't played them. You do get an ending cutscene for beating the game, but it just shows Kiwi and the dog flying off in the newly repaired plane. That's it. There's no dialogue, we don't see where they end up after their flight, nothing. Kinda disappointing, but ultimately not a huge deal. I just find it weird that the whole idea of Kiwi being stuck on a floating island and needing the gems to power the plane to escape, you know, the whole narrative reason for everything you do in the game, is exclusive to a completely different game and never mentioned in the actual Super Kiwi 64 game. It's vaguely alluded to, but that's it. Additionally, the whole mystery of where the floating island came from or why it's there that was set up in Beanie is never resolved or even brought up at all in Super Kiwi 64. So for players who never played Beanie, there's no narrative explanation for what's going on or why Kiwi needs to collect these gems, aside from a number floating above this plane. Much like in Tori 3D, the lack of narrative isn't really going to drag anyone's experience down, but the fact that we have an established context for this game's story, but it's locked away in a completely different game, is just kind of baffling to me. Why not have a brief intro cutscene with a recap of the events of Beanie to catch people up who skipped out on it? I mean, Tori 2 had an intro cutscene. I don't know, it just seems very strange to approach the storytelling this way. Like I said, this ultimately isn't a big deal, and I don't want it to seem like I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but I can't help but express my confusion at this choice. Moving on to the visuals, I've unfortunately got just a little bit more complaining to do. Back in my Tori reviews, I applauded those games' visual style as cute, colorful, and sharp, but was disappointed on the technical side of things due to a lack of basic options. Unfortunately, the story is much the same here, though I'm not quite as fond of this game's visual style as I am of Tori's. Given the name, this game is clearly trying to emulate the style of the Nintendo 64, with low-poly models, alias 2D sprites, and low-res textures stretched and tiled across the geometry, much like you would see in Super Mario 64 or banjo-kazooie. Obviously, though, we have some modern conveniences like higher internal resolution, widescreen, and 60 FPS. I have to admit, though, I was never really a fan of the way the N64 looked. That ugly bilinear filter, the stretched-out low-res textures, the darker color palette, I'm just not a fan. When games try to emulate that look, then, I usually end up not really liking it as much as games that emulate the PS1 visual style like Tori did. Super Kiwi 64 has something weird going on with the resolution, where at 4K it still looks kinda blurry and has some pretty rough screen tearing going on. I tried forcing the resolution to 1080p and upscaling it in OBS, and that took care of the screen tearing, but it looked even more blurry, so I just went with native 4K for footage. I'm guessing the game just has a built-in bilinear filter or something to that effect to try and recreate that N64 look, but to me it just looks blurry and weird. This is where some good video options could have helped a ton for people like me that are more picky about this kind of stuff, but just like the Tori games, Super Kiwi 64 is sadly lacking in that department. A VSync option could have fixed the screen tearing, and an option to turn the blur filter on and off would have been greatly appreciated. There really should at least be built-in resolution settings and a full screen toggle, but instead I have to edit these in the Steam launch options. I'm not asking for The Last of Us Part 2's suite of settings here, just some basic video options. I mean, the game doesn't even have an exit to desktop button. I have to Alt F4 to close the game every time. Even Tori had that. Despite all my whining, I do still want to give credit where it's due here. While it may not be for me, the N64 visual style is quite lovingly recreated, and for those with nostalgia for this era, I'm sure a lot of you won't mind these issues nearly as much as I do. This game is also clearly going for a more atmospheric look compared to the colorful and vibrant aesthetic of Tori, with more of a focus being put on lighting and detail. The environmental design is pretty great, with some real standouts in the crowd. The forest is luscious and dense, the desert is vast and sprawling while teeming with secrets, and these temple levels are super creepy. There's also Siactro's usual dabble into light horror aesthetics, contrasting nicely with the otherwise lighthearted and cartoony art style, with skeletons lying around and strange markings on the walls. If you're not bothered by the more technical aspects, then you'll probably really love the game's visuals, and I'm not so much of a snob as to disregard all the hard work put into them just because of a little bit of blur and screen tearing. I'd rather those issues not be there, of course. They are pretty distracting to me, but still, I can't complain too much when the environmental design is so on point. The atmosphere on display here is really top-notch. Assisting in this game's atmospheric tone is the soundtrack, composed by Kent Kircher. The forest theme is led by this echoey pan flute, and it's absolutely beautiful, one of my favorite tracks in the game. The desert theme's haunting melody is another highlight, with a really nice percussion track and these soothing vocals fading in and out of the background. The dark and hub themes are both pretty simple, going more for atmosphere than melody, so personally I find them fairly unmemorable, but they still fit their locations really well. The beach theme is by far my favorite song in the game though, with a Spanish influence giving it a really unique style. The highly pronounced bass, acoustic guitar, and castanets drive the rhythm, with the vocals and trumpets contrasting each other to give it a simultaneously exciting and chilling feeling. It's absolutely brilliant. Throughout each song in the soundtrack is an atmospheric touch that really makes the game feel a lot more immersive compared to Tori's bubbly, poppy soundtracks. I may like Tori 2's OST more on the whole, but I can't deny the bangers on display here in Super Kiwi 64. One detail I really appreciate is that the music for each area plays in the hub world outside of those levels, and so when you exit one level and go to the next one in that area, the music keeps playing uninterrupted. Considering how short the levels are, this is a nice way to make sure players get to experience the full songs in their entirety while also just being a pretty cool effect. I don't really have a whole lot to say considering the soundtrack only has 5 songs, but what's here is great. Okay, so like I said, the levels are pretty short, and there's only 8 of them. This game is really short, but I don't think it's exactly fair to come at this game the same way you would any other Collectathon. Yes, it's short, and I'd actually argue that this game's short length is its strength. Like I said, I absolutely love Collectathons. It's probably my #1 favorite genre, thanks to games like the Spyro trilogy, Jak and Daxter, Mario Sunshine, Mario Odyssey, and so on. One common issue with the genre, though, is bloat. These games have a tendency to get tedious and repetitive with way too much shit to collect, and many times they'll overcorrect with minigames and extra playstyles that feel out of place. Striking a good balance there is very difficult, and most people have differing opinions on where that balance lies. One way to avoid all that would be to just make a shorter game, so you can have all the benefits of the genre without any of the drawbacks. But back in the 5th and 6th generation, where collectathons were at their peak, you couldn't sell an hour-long game for full price. Thankfully, we live in an age where indie games can be much more experimental, even with something like game length, and they just price themselves accordingly to make up for that. Since Super Kiwi 64 is only $3, the short runtime feels fair for the price you pay, especially if the content within is really fun. I wanted to open the gameplay analysis with this discussion about length and value because the short length actually informs a lot of the game's design and where it deviates from others in the genre, so keep all of this in mind as we continue. For now though, let's dial things back and talk about the basics. Controls are pretty straightforward. Kiwi can dash, jump, glide, and peck into walls with his beak, which he can then jump out of and peck again. Normally you can only peck once while in the air, but if you stick into a wall or land on the ground, that refreshes and you can do it again. This means you can technically climb infinitely upwards, so long as you have a wall to climb against. In fact, you can very easily get out of the level's bounds and fly towards the skybox, but eventually you'll go too far and get warped back to the hub world. Some walls won't be a straight line though, but you can still climb them with some more precise movement. It may sound like this would make the game too easy, as it removes the need for any platforming, and that is kind of true, but it's also kinda slow. Have you noticed just how fast Kiwi is? I mean, he can really blaze through these levels. The movement in this game is incredibly responsive, and if the running speed still wasn't fast enough for you, you can spam attacks for even more speed, albeit in short bursts. This speed is what makes the game so damn fun. The reason why Spyro is one of my favorites in the genre is because of his speed. A skilled player can charge throughout practically the entire game without ever slowing down, and mastering the movement to shorten your playthrough has a unique speedrun appeal that some collectathons are somewhat lacking in. Super Kiwi 64 doubles down on this speedrun appeal with shorter levels and even faster movement. The fact that you can move so fast and clear out levels so quickly adds to the replayability. I mean, you can play through the game 100% in a single sitting easily, so anytime I've got a collectathon itch, I can pull up this game and be done in less than an afternoon. Again, the game's short length works in its favor. You get a quick fix of speedy platforming, and it's fun for the entire runtime. No padding, no tedium, just pure fun from start to finish. While Tori excelled in replayability thanks to extra collectibles and time trials, those don't really work in a collectathon due to the open-ended sandbox level design. Unless you make a whole mode out of it like Luigi's Balloon World or the race challenges in Tinykin, but the levels in Kiwi are too small for something like that to really work here. Instead, Kiwi gets its replayability from its short length. Replaying a normal-length collectathon is more of a commitment, but Kiwi's short length allows it to be completed in a single sitting any day. I'm more likely to give this a quick replay than another game that I like more, such as Spyro 3 or Mario Sunshine, simply because those games are a much longer commitment. Kiwi still retains the satisfying fast-paced gameplay of other highlights of the collectathon genre thanks to its tight responsive controls, without the longer runtime that can often pad those other games out to a tedious degree. The level design is what really brings this game together though. There are 8 levels plus an unlockable secret level, and they each have 6 gems to collect. Every level has a number of gears that spawn one of the gems when collected, a few rings for another gem, and 1 or 2 that'll be in out-of-the-way places or at the end of a platforming challenge, with the rest usually locked behind some other kind of puzzle or challenge, like finding and striking all the targets or boxes in a level. Each of the 8 levels do tend to reuse similar challenges, but because of their short length, it never feels boring or tedious. If the game went on for 5 hours of this, then yeah, it would probably get boring. Spyro 1 is an example of a collectathon that just doesn't do enough to shake things up throughout its runtime. That game is considerably longer though. Kiwi's short length means that the game would be over long before you'd ever get bored of it. Even within that short runtime, it still shakes things up with unique levels and some light puzzle elements to keep things extra fresh. The first 2 levels are pretty straightforward, allowing you to get accustomed to the controls, learn the moveset, and explore without any hazards or complicated elements. They're also the smallest levels in the game, so you can pretty easily find everything without getting lost. The desert levels start introducing some small puzzles, like keys you need to open doors and buttons to raise water or lava levels. You also get your first hazards, which can take away your health, but they're basically not a threat at all. I've never died in this game once. Killing enemies doesn't do anything either. You can pretty much ignore them entirely and you'll be fine. I do think a Spyro-like system where maybe dropping a gear from each enemy would help by forcing players to actually engage with the combat, but there are only a few enemies in the game anyway, so it's not a big deal. This is also where levels start requiring you to use the wall jump, so the game even manages to increase mechanical tension within its short runtime. Level 4 shakes things up even more, being entirely vertical. Again, you could theoretically climb up the whole thing in one go, but you'd be missing all the collectibles, and it's not even really that fast compared to these speedy elevators. The temple levels are where things get more puzzly, with level 5 requiring you to change water levels and colored gates back and forth to grab keys to progress. This one locks every single gem in a cage at the very end of the level, so you just have to solve this level's puzzle box to get all the rewards at the end. Level 6 is another vertical one, with little platforming challenges ending in a switch that unlocks the coffin in the center of each floor. Gears are cleverly placed along these paths so the player has to actually engage with the challenges instead of just flying over them all. The beach levels are really fun with some of the best hidden collectibles, toughest challenges, and some unique elements that help them stand out, like this weird structure you pull out of the ocean in level 7 or the boosters in level 8. This one has some of the best challenges in the game, like running through flags over the water, scaling the city buildings, flying the ship up to get a gem, and flying across the map to grab keys. And you run super fast the whole time. Just really brilliant stuff all around. Despite its short length and repeated tasks, the level design manages to keep mixing things up and giving you new stuff to do and new sights to see. That's the magic of Super Kiwi 64. Even though it didn't really need to shake things up due to its short length, automatically making it easy to stay engaging throughout the game's entire runtime, it still offers you new experiences in every single level, and that's really admirable. Collecting all 48 gems unlocks a bonus area with a 49th gem and some strange symbols on a wall. That's where we get into the game's secrets. In each level, you'll find these strange symbols etched on the walls. Until you collect the 48 gems, they're just mysterious little symbols, but this wall in the bonus area is actually a bunch of buttons, and these etchings in the walls are codes. Entering the different codes will mostly unlock different skins. You can play as the airplane dog, an armored knight, a gem, and even one of these weird embryo things. The Switch version even has Regina and Mac as a playable skin, but I don't own the Switch version. One of the codes will unlock a low gravity mode, and another unlocks a first person mode, which is really fun to play around with. The most well-hidden code in the game is in level 6, where you have to match up the symbols on top of the coffins on each floor in the level. The final code unlocks one last level, the map from the original Kiwi 64 game. At the very top is the old Kiwi model, and the game's final 50th gem. I love this cheat code side quest. It adds one final layer of exploration and wraps the game up on a high note. Before I wrap up, I want to show off one final Easter egg. By forcing the game to run at 20 FPS, you can more easily clip through elevators, and when on ground level, they can push you out of bounds. From here, wall jumping glide through this specific path while staying out of bounds, and you can find some unused beta areas off in the distance from the hub. You can even make it far enough to run around inside one of them with the right angle. Shoutouts to Lily in the Siactro Discord for discovering this, it's so cool. Super Kiwi 64 may not be my favorite of Siactro's work, or my favorite Collectathon, but in looking at it more critically, I've come to appreciate its strength so much more. It puts a unique spin on the genre by keeping its runtime brief, allowing it to get away with a straightforward core experience without ever getting repetitive or boring, and that's really impressive. It's rare that you see this kind of innovation in a genre so old, so major props to Siactro for making such a fun, unique, and charming game. Not to mention the incredible atmosphere thanks to its N64-inspired aesthetics and fantastic music. Super Kiwi 64 is a wonderful little collectathon, and I highly recommend it. I know this one was a lot shorter than my recent output, but I needed something a little simpler to get out in time this month, as next month's project is going to be my biggest one yet. That's right, it's finally happening. For real this time. If you enjoyed the video, do please leave a like and a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Special thanks to my patrons here on the screen. If you'd like to support me financially in keeping this monthly content going, you can donate to me there. Links in the description. Thanks for watching!